Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, October 20th, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. Also back, it's the A-Team. How about this? 2 weeks in a row, we've got Luke Thomas, who now switches things up again and goes back to the same old mundane look. What happened to the red, the natitude?
Gotta keep the clothes changing to keep them on their toes, right, babe?
Okay.
That's a bodybuilding reference.
I like it.
There you go.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You're looking good. You're looking good.
This is the worst intro I've ever seen.
No, you're looking good.
Thank you. Yes, I know I look good. Jesus.
Well, you were very self-conscious about your look. You changed and you went back, so I'm just trying to make you feel better.
The Ken Bone sweater, I'm not putting it away for life. It might make an appearance here. The thing was hot today, so I was like, yeah,
okay. He, of course, is of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man of the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com.
You do. Yeah.
I agree. And there he is, the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. Okay, guys, a lot to discuss. We thought it was going to be sort of a dull period in MMA leading up to 205. That is not the case. Let's start with George St. Pierre. On Monday on the MMA Hour, he comes out and declares himself essentially a free agent. Now, we all know you can't just do that in this day and age, but his comments were very interesting, and we will talk about them. UFC responds later that day, says, nah, you're not a free agent. So it's sort of shades of Randy Couture. This is going to either be played out, in some back room in Las Vegas or maybe in the courts. First things first, when GSP came out and said this stuff, what was your reaction?
Very first reaction?
Yeah.
Holy F balls.
Verbatim?
Maybe.
Okay.
No, I think my first reaction was like, what? Because the way I didn't hear that part live. I had to go back and hear it. So when I first heard it coming through Twitter, and then I clicked back on the link, it was like he is a free agent. I was like, they let him go? Okay, so then I went back and I listened to exactly what he had to say, and I was like, well, no. He's saying he's a free agent. So to your point, my first thought was, ooh, it's Randy Couture 2.0. Now, we'll see what happens. My opinion since then has changed pretty dramatically. I don't feel like I did when he first announced it. In fact, I feel much less, I don't know if enthusiasm is the word, but much less commotion. But I guess just as a broad takeaway, even if my opinion has changed, and I bet you feel the same, it is remarkable that, it's not remarkable that the UFC battles with their stars. This is very common. It is remarkable that one of the guys who would easily be on the Mount Rushmore of MMA ahead of a return to Canada is having to resort to these kinds of tactics to get a new contract, which is essentially what I believe. I find that to be shocking.
Now, when you say resort to these, just so we're clear, like speaking about it, or that it's gone this bad that he was forced to speak about it?
That he can't get whatever he feels like he's entitled to.
Sure.
This has never happened before. Whatever differences they've had, they've always been able to work them out. And now he has to go out and declare himself a free agency, and his lawyer is saying, we will go to court if we have to. Like, wow, really? That's how far this guy has to go to do this? That's crazy to consider.
Now, Sean Al-Shadi of MMA Fighting spoke to James Quinn. You spoke to James Quinn on your show. Based off of what he is saying, and, the UFC statement was like, 3 sentences, but it's pretty clear what they think of the whole situation. Does he have a case here, or do you think that this is maybe just sort of negotiations on his part?
It could be either thing, but I mean, I did read Sean's piece and I listened to yours. It's really interesting to hear a lawyer's take on what they're reading, because a lot of times we just sort of speculate as to, these contracts are just aimed for the UFC. They have nothing to do with the fighter. It's all one way and not the other. But to hear him kind of, pointing out, I know on your show he kind of did point out a little bit of the restrictive language that goes into it, and he was referring to it in that piece with Sean about 1940s, the throwback to that and 21st century slavery. You hear those types of things and you think, well, this is a guy who's looked at a lot of contracts in his day, and to even hear that kind of come out makes you really wonder, about the restrictive nature of these contracts and why there's so much frustration from these guys, especially in licensing and things like that, where they're just hemmed in. They can't go out and do that, make extra money in that way without consultation or all that stuff going into it. But I feel like with GSP, the whole thing goes back before the Hendricks thing, and I know it's on your show and we talked about this a little bit. There's been this divide between him and the UFC that goes back well before he stepped away, what I'm saying? And when I heard him say that, my first reaction was something similar, like, wow, this is crazy, I can't believe he's a free agent. But then as he explained the process, I'm like, wait a minute, I have to hear the other side of this, because now this is his version as a free agent, and we know there's going to be a second side to it. But it didn't really surprise me in the sense that I don't feel like they can get on the same page. They've never been on the same page for 3 years. Even going back when he was advocating for a third-party drug testing when that Hendricks fight, and felt like he was being scoffed at. There was just this resentment. I just felt like that for 3 years they have not been able to find common ground, and that's why it wasn't that surprising to me.
Yeah, when I heard this, and this is before you had the lawyer on your show, Luke, and also before Sean's story came out, that was my first question, was centered upon the lawyer, because anybody can come out and say I'm a free agent, and anybody can get a lawyer to back you out. But I immediately looked up James Quinn and went to the website of his law firm and looked at some of the lists of some of the clients and some of the cases that he's been involved in. And the guy is he's a heavy hitter, and so doesn't mean that he's going to go into court and beat the UFC. But it certainly means that he thinks he can, and he's got the equipment to do so. So. The UFC is going to be in for a fight. Not just one fight, really, though. It's going to be more than one fight, because George St. Pierre is not just a guy who's eligible for the Mount Rushmore of MMA because of the kind of fighter he is. He also would be on the Mount Rushmore of MMA fighters in terms of one of the most personable and likable guys who's ever been in the sport. And so if there's going to be fan support for one side or the other, there always is going to be fan support for the fighter over the company, but now more than ever, it's going to be for the guy rather than the company, especially in light of all the other stuff we've seen going on since the new ownership came aboard.
Just like he is in the cage, GSP is a very calculated guy. His team, perhaps even more so. Even though, yes, you can't just say you're a free agent and then you become a free agent. Once he said that, you had to know that they had done their due diligence, that they looked at everything, that they were pretty confident that they had a case here at least. Who knows if the UFC was going to let them just walk out and sign with Bellator, but that they've actually looked at this, they got the right guy, they got the right team behind them. So I thought that was very interesting. It's also very interesting, and I think this has happened a few times this year. Perhaps the first time was when my issue with the UFC came up at 199, when the mainstream sports media starts to look at our sport from the outside looking in. They're not so familiar with what goes on in this crazy world that we live in. They're like, wait, this stuff actually happens? Like people get banned? Sure. It also, to me, happened when Jeff Boris came on board and said, what? I looked at this contract, these guys should have a union. And now with James Quinn, like what he said to you and Sean, when you see someone from the outside who knows nothing about MMA start to really, go through the finer details of this sport and the revelations that they have about how sort of archaic the sport is being run, that is fascinating to me. Like, wow, it's one thing for us to talk about it, but once it sort of reaches, the outer limits of the sports world or just, the mainstream business world, whatever, it's always very interesting to see people's initial reaction about how behind the times mixed martial arts is, right?
Who's going to do something about it? Jeff Boris is trying, I suppose. We'll see how successful that is. But is GSP really going to see that? This is the big question to me, is what you believe GSP is ultimately doing here. What is he doing? My hunch, my read on this is that he's just trying to get another UFC contract. Should it be necessary to have court proceedings, I suppose they'll fall down that rabbit hole as far as it will go. But fundamentally ask yourself, when Mayweather wanted to be rid of Top Rank and Bob Arum, what did he do? Now, this is not an option available to George St. Pierre, but just follow me here for a minute. He bought out his contract. He wanted to be done with Top Rank. I really don't get the sense that's what St. Pierre wants to do. There are certainly unresolved issues, and his lawyer told me personally that the Reebok issue is not resolved. I mean, they feel like they can work it out, but it wasn't like they checked that off the list and said, we're done with that part of the negotiation. No, that's still in play. But him saying, well, you know what, look, what could happen here? We could go to court, we could just get a new deal. If I was the UFC, that's what I would do if I were them. Saying things like that. I just feel like these things you're talking about, it is madness. And everyone's like, GSP's got to be that guy to lead the charge. I don't think that's what, and I don't blame him for not doing it, but I don't really feel like that's what this is. This is him trying to say, let's get a new deal going.
I will say, though, that he is maybe backing into it, or a default figure to fall into that category, because for so long we have talked about what is wrong. What is wrong? What are these people griping about? What is going on? Well, he's this figure who basically walked away as a champion for reasons that were just not. I mean, part of it was that he was burnt out and he was obsessing over the sport. You know, he gave those reasons, but also partially because of the drug testing and all the things that were going on, what he felt was going on, and he stood up for those things. You know, vocally he was pretty vocal about all those things, and now he finds himself in a position where they're examining or putting scrutiny on a contract and what these things mean, and you're at a moment when there's so much kind of going on, so much turmoil within the UFC and so much change that he almost becomes the default figure for this. You know what I mean? Like, regardless if that's his angle or not, I just feel like he starts to take on more meaning because of who he is. And also, he did this in the prime of his career. This wasn't a guy. Some of these guys, they get on board with and they get more active as time goes on. They're past their fighting prime. Well, this is a guy who could show up tomorrow and he's still the champion. He still hasn't lost since Matt Serra. You know what I'm saying? So he's just has that. He's appropriately placed to have significance, to make some change. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, you know, what you brought up, Luke, about whether this is his intention or not. I see where you're going with that, but I do feel as though whether it's his intention or not, I feel like this is a moment where, you know, GSP is going to symbolize something for the larger community of fighters. And I use the word community maybe ill-advisedly, because there is not necessarily a community right now. There's no fighters association or union, but I do think that the sport as a whole, or at least the UFC segment of it, has had a kind of a family atmosphere to some extent. Maybe the Fertitta brothers have owned the company for a long time, and there was this kind of family thing, and that kind of went away with the new ownership. And then the new ownership comes in and just cuts off a lot of the staff. I mean, I worked for a long time for the Boston Globe, and the Globe was owned from the time it was created in the 1870s, it was owned by the Taylor family. And when I came on after college, it was still owned by the Taylor family. And there was a kind of a family atmosphere at that place, even though we had a union and we had the different negotiations, but there was still like a family feeling. But in the early 1990s, the Globe was bought by the New York Times, and everything changed. Everything changed, and the whole aura in that company changed. And I think that everything's going to change in the UFC, and we're already seeing it happen.
There was very similarly. That's how I related to it too. I used to work at LA Weekly, but at the time it was Stern Publishing, which was more of a family-oriented business.
Muckraking rag.
And people wouldn't wrap their fish in that. But this thing was like a family atmosphere. They had a lot of brilliant writers on there. I was not one of them, but like these guys at the time were like really positioned the way they were. Village Voice Media comes and buys it, and I feel like that's what you see is just like, whoa, what is happening? Who's getting cut? What is it? This guy's salary is going to stick out now. There's these expenses. All these things just start to happen, and the morale just nosedived right away.
So look, okay, we talked about Couture. Let's talk about Couture for a second, because I feel like that's an important distinction to make, or important lesson to learn, I should say.
Okay.
So, 2 lawsuits Couture was involved in. Number 1, UFC sued him for his employment contract, and also various other breaches of like bad-mouthing them for damages about $10,000. They never sued him on the promotional stuff. In fact, it was Mark Cuban who sued Zuffa to get a judge to decide, does this promotional agreement with 2 fights, does it expire or does it not expire, was the basic question, okay? And he did that because he wanted to put a fight on with Fedor at HDNet.
Yep.
Who is going to jump into the fray with St. Pierre to make what he did legally actionable? Scott Coker? Every time you talk to Scott Coker, what did he say? I got a text from the Bellator PR guy. Does Bellator have a response? And it was literally quotes. That's interesting, Scott Coker. You've interviewed him twice as many times as I have. What does he say every time you bring someone up who's got like 1 fight left on their deal? Oh yeah, you know, look, if everything down the road, we'll talk to him then. But right now he's under contract. We don't want to touch him. You mean to tell me Viacom's going to get involved with GSP to figure out whether or not?
Why not?
I just don't buy that.
Look, Scott Coker isn't the owner of Bellator, right?
Right, Viacom.
Viacom and the UFC now have a rocky relationship, right?
Viacom is in the middle of a crisis.
I understand that. But if they do want to try to get into the St. Pierre business, I don't put it past them. I don't think they can't do it.
Oh, they certainly can. Scott Coker has been loath to do things like that previously.
But I don't know if it's his call. I mean, of course, they're going to lean on him Do you want to sign this guy?
To the extent he has say, I bet you he doesn't want
Sure.
to do it. Now, again, if some donk executive at the top who somehow managed to
Yeah.
live through this Sumner Redstone nonsense wants to do it, well, then that happens. But that's what's necessary here. And I'm just wondering who's going to play that role. It's not clear to me.
Who's the billionaire, so
Yeah.
to speak? Now, let me ask you guys this. One thing that GSP said on Monday that I thought was really interesting was he was essentially at the goal line with Lorenzo Fertitta. Like they had crossed all these bridges, all these roadblocks were cleared. He was so close, and then the company gets sold. Just a couple of weeks ago, Chris Weidman said that Lorenzo Fertitta was used as a mediator to close his deal to get a new contract, opening the door for him to fight Yoel Romero. Are you surprised that Lorenzo isn't being brought in here to not, sort of resurrect that old deal? But clearly there's a relationship there. Clearly they were on good terms because they were talking. Why not do the same for GSP? What do you guys think?
I don't know how you feel about this. I was kind of shocked by that too.
Which part? I was shocked about the Weidman thing, but then once it was done for Weidman, and then remember, sorry to interrupt, but on FS1 last week, I think it was on UFC Tonight, Daniel Cormier asked Dana White about Lorenzo Fertitta and about the Weidman thing. And Dana White clearly said, Lorenzo Fertitta is not dead. He has a beard this big. If you have a good relationship with him, you should reach out to him. He is still available to you guys. He clearly said that on FS1. I don't understand why he's not being used this time around.
Man, this is an interesting one, too. So one of the major theories floating around there is the fact that Weidman represented by WME, George represented by a competing agency, CAA.
Yep.
So I asked his lawyer, okay, to what extent is that relevant? He was like, it was non-committal. Didn't say it wasn't, didn't say it was the major cause either. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the cause. It may well be, but I didn't get a clear vibe on it. Some have said, well, there's, the Weidman one is a little bit more of a no-brainer. He's not asking for as much money. It's an easier deal to get done. But it seems to me that, I don't know, man. How do you not reach a deal with a guy this important? It has to be very important for you to not reach the deal on the terms he's asking, which it sounds to me like they told Lorenzo to back off. Of course, he's his own man. But he can't interfere in the role that he's in, or at least up to a point.
They have to call him in. He can't just jump in.
Right. Because even if he and GSP reach a deal, WME has to honor it.
Of course.
And I just wonder if they were like, pump the brakes a little bit this one. We are not bowing to his demands.
Another interesting thing that he said was that they told him that they sort of have to spend a lot of money in reintroducing him to the audience. 3 years, essentially. It's now been, it'll be 3 years, end of November, since he last fought. How much weight does the name GSP hold in 2016? And also, let's not forget that towards the end of his career, I think some fans were saying, look, you're not finishing fights. It's not the most exciting fighter out there. People were critical of him. I remember at 129, you were there too. Yeah. People were booing that fight. Now, he was suffering from a pretty bad eye injury, but, it wasn't like he was going out there and finishing guys like, the Korean Superboy. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course.
But in 2016, it seems like people are nostalgic. They miss him. They want to see him back. Is this idea that they have to reintroduce him to the audience, does that make any sense to you?
Not really.
Okay.
Because he was one of the few guys who I don't think he was nowhere near as transcendent as Ronda Rousey became or Conor McGregor is currently, but he was one of those guys who, if you said GSP is one of those original guys, people would know GSP. They'd know those initials. I just feel like he had too much of a presence outside of our circle. You know what I'm saying? So I don't really believe that people forget that, and the people within the circle, like you said, I do think it's nostalgic because he would factor in there maybe with John Jones before his travails as the other guy, right? It's also just this dominance. People don't see that in our sport anymore. You're not seeing it as much with John Jones gone. We have Demetrius Johnson. GSP was one of those guys he didn't lose. You know what I mean? He fought and he fought. Now you could say that he lost that last fight. That's where maybe he was losing some of his star because I think people were like, he might be a little washed up. He's getting really beat up at this juncture of his career, but honestly, he still didn't lose. I mean, he still got his armors and he walked away with the same. I think people are just, they identify with a winner, and I still think that that's what he is in people's minds.
It may be that the guys who run WME, George St. Pierre hasn't fought in 3 years. Maybe those guys weren't following the sport back that far.
Yeah.
Sort of saying that jokingly, but they don't have the same kind of pedigree that Fertitta had. That's a guy who was, Lorenzo Fertitta was a fan of MMA and a commissioner in Vegas, in Nevada, before he was running the company. That's a guy who had fighting in him, and all the people that ran the show. I mean, I really think this is going to be a significant thing going forward. Those are guys that some of the fighters felt some kind of personal connection to. They don't feel a personal connection to these guys running the show now. And these guys, maybe some of them don't know much about GSP because he didn't fight for 3 years. Maybe some of those guys really don't even remember the guy.
Because they're in the star business, right? Like this ownership group is all about making stars and keeping stars and doing the right things by stars. So all you have to do really is go back and look at UFC 129. You know what I mean? He's fighting a guy, Jake Shields, who wouldn't draw. You know, he couldn't sell out a place on his own. I don't think.
His last fight just got canceled and moved.
Yeah. So I'm like, and yet there's 55,000 people. I know they were breaking into a new market and all this stuff, but it was. I mean, you just go back and look at his star potential from those days, and you can't really think you're that far beyond. He never lost in between.
But of course, if you're, you know, you also have to realize that these are guys who made a lot of money doing business deals, and if you're doing business deals, you come to negotiations from your position, which is to, you know, present the other side as littler than you, and so obviously it makes sense from that perspective to say, well, we're going to have to reintroduce you, and that's going to cost us money, and so they're going to present all of the little things that they have to do in order to boost him up. It's, you know, there's probably not very little reality in that, but that's how they do business.
Most are just things to say, he's back. How
right.
do you read?
Well, let's be fair. There is a measure of proper promotion that goes into telling the story properly of the return of St. Pierre, right? You wouldn't want any old group to do that. You would want the right team of people to tell the story the right way. You would want the right kind of production elements around it. I think that is fair to say. However,
Is it any different than the return of Joe Schmo?
Ronda Rousey after
the return of St. Pierre, yeah, it's different than the return of
No,
Joe Schmo.
I
is
know
it
that,
different?
but in terms of
The greatest fighter of all time?
in terms of what you have to invest in telling that story, is it any different than the money that they have to invest in telling the story of Cormier Johnson too? Like, is there really a lot of
If
work?
you want to do it correctly, yeah. I mean, this is if you treat this like any old other fight, then it is any old other fight.
I don't know. I mean, I just think the fact that he's back is.
Hear me out on this.
Okay,
hear me out on
okay.
this. So, but the point is this: Kimbo Slice had how many lives? And when he came back to Spike, he still did. He's the most popular fighter Bellator has ever had.
Yep.
They still did specials around Kimbo Slice. There still is something to be said about kind of making this as big as it should be. I'm not calling for a Herculean effort. I'm calling for the right kind of effort. But that's not all that costly. I'm just saying there is something to be said about telling it correctly. It's just not super costly.
Shouldn't be a stumbling block.
Here's the bigger point.
Okay.
Everyone floats around this number about what he wanted to come back, and I've heard the number before. I've been told it's $10 million.
Right.
And I've heard fans say, well, that's an absurd amount. No wonder they won't do it. I find that laughable.
Yeah.
Okay? The guaranteed purse, just the guarantee, forget everything else he got, for Mayweather to fight Canelo was $42 million. Just a guarantee. Now, of course, the rest of that card is not going to have the same kind of costs. Producing a UFC event costs more. So it is not apples to oranges. But $10 million is a fraction, literally a fraction, 1/4 of 40. If you make the correct St. Pierre fight, you tell the story correctly with the right opponent in the right place. Oh, I don't know, maybe Toronto in December?
Yeah.
You mean to tell me you can't make a ton of cash? I find that ridiculous.
He would be so worth it. I mean, just look at the ticket prices for 206. $400 is the most expensive ticket, which is akin to any sort of Vegas fight night. You know, he would bring back.
Get you in the door at MSG, right?
Exactly. He brings back some. Okay, here's an interesting point that Dana continues to bring up. He doesn't believe GSP wants to fight. He doesn't see it in him. When he hears him speak, when he sees the way he acts, he's not a fighter anymore. That ship has sailed. If they truly believe that, and of course he can only answer this question, I know part of that is gamesmanship, but if they truly believe that, why are they standing in his way? If they don't believe that he wants to fight, if they don't believe that he brings anything to the table anymore, why are they standing in his way? What do you think, Jeff?
I'm just going to nod my head. I'm going to nod my head slowly and say, maybe I think you might have found a little bit of a lapse of logic there, Mr. Helwani. I believe you have. Of course, it is. It's all part of the game. It's all It's all part of the tactic of negotiation. Dana White has been around the sport long enough to know that George St. Pierre is and always has been a fighter. I'll leave it at that.
I think that as much, I mean, I know it's easy to take the fighter's stance, but I think there is probably some truth that he's a hard person to deal with. And it's because he's kind of broken down a lot of doors for them. He helped them throughout the Canadian market and all the things he's done. He knows his own drawing power. He should be doing that. But I do believe, from their perspective especially, that he's been very hard to deal with. You know what I mean? I feel like even when I hear him on your show, he's still kind of, there's some vague things in there that you're like, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like GSP he's not just going to play ball.
Well, you have to also consider his team. I personally think he has a very good team behind him. I mean, just look what they did for Gilbert Melendez, and I do think that some of this dissension dates back to the Gilbert Melendez situation. Dana White openly said that he wasn't a big fan of Melendez's management team, who are the guys who represent GSP. I think when the UFC wants to make a deal, they can make a deal, but for whatever reason, they don't want to make a deal right now, and it could be the CAA WME thing. I mean, there's a lot of factors at play here. I just look at that UFC 206 card, which he clearly wants to be a part of. He's almost trying to campaign and say, like, put me on that card. I want to be on that card for the Canadian fans. I want to be back. I'm ready to be back. And the whole thing drastically changes with him and without him. Like, you look at it right now, I think there are 10 fights on that card officially. I mean,
They are nubs.
Cormier Johnson is a fantastic
Super
fight.
good fight, yes.
But I don't even know, in this day and age of co-main event, I mean, we all know that that word is overused. I don't even know what's the second to last fight. I don't even know what's the pay-per-view card. You know
it's
what
like
I mean?
main event, and then
I don't
you can
understand it.
interchange all of them at that point.
And the fact that there's only 10 fights right now leads me to believe that this thing isn't done. The fact that he didn't completely torpedo that bridge on Monday leads me to believe that there's still some hope. I mean, December 10th, what are we, October 20th? It's still possible, I think. But, that card...
Tickets already went on sale.
Tickets went on sale, and I'd love to know how they're doing. But it's just amazing how just his presence versus, again, like a broomstick, a la Conor McGregor, drastically changes everything. Can you think of another time where they would have had 3 cards, pay-per-view cards, like 205, 206 with GSP, and then 207 with Ronda? That's got to be the greatest 3 pay-per-view card stretch in UFC history, right? I mean, those are 3 1 million pay-per-view by cards, right? Without a doubt.
With the right opponent for GSP.
Really? You don't think his return is big enough?
Would GSP versus Lawler do it?
Yeah, maybe. And also, we have to remember that people are probably...
I'm not saying it wouldn't.
People are going to buy 205 and 207, and that's why that card without him is going to suffer.
It's going to get buried.
Yeah, people are just going to skip it, right?
Get buried, super buried. I mean, there are some okay fights on there for. It's literally you take off. Okay, so you take off Johnson. And Cormier. It's a fight night. It's a fight pass fight night. It's like a
If that.
Fox Sports. Yeah, like if that. Like Nikita Krylov versus Misha Serkunov. Yeah. That's a cool fight for people like us.
Yeah.
That's about it. You know what I mean? So usually we're used to like the big events coming in pairs. UFC 100, UFC 101. There's been a couple other ones where Ronda involved. To get the three-peat would be unprecedented, and they just said, no thanks.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Do you think this is dead, Jeff? Do you think
No, I don't, because listening to GSP on your show, the beginning of the interview was all him talking about being a free agent, and it sounded like him, fading off into the distance.
Yeah.
But as the interview wore on, it seemed like he was coming back, and he talked a little bit more about the possibility of re-signing with them. I think you even asked him explicitly, would you re-sign with the UFC, assuming you are a free agent? And he did not discount any possibility. And it just sounded like, again, the negotiating through the media thing, if he was really, if being a free agent was all that he cared about and he was looking to move on to a new horizon, I don't think he would have even allowed you to pursue that possibility of him staying with the UFC. I think he would have just been just like, I'm out of here.
And I can confirm, and I don't know if this is related, but MMA Junkie reported that he was in Vegas yesterday, seen in Vegas.
Just hanging out, though.
Just hanging out. But GSP, I mean, that's a far ways from Montreal.
Yeah.
Don't know why,
So
but...
I'm telling you,
Cirque du Soleil.
I just don't buy this idea that he's just going to lead them into court to change the rights of fighters forever. It might happen that way. Find that very unlikely.
Let me ask you guys this. Another thing, as you alluded to, was the Reebok issue, right? And it seems like something was going to be worked out if, in fact, he signed that deal that he had negotiated with Lorenzo. But it kind of reminds me of the day this whole Reebok thing was introduced. All the money's going to the fighters. This is going to be a great thing. What a huge moment it is for the sport. I mean, we were just sort of eating it up. And we did raise questions, of course, but I just keep thinking about that initial press conference. And you think about the fact that all the fighters signed these addendums to allow themselves to, be policed this way and not bring in their own sponsors and wear these uniforms. And they did the same with USADA. Does this almost go back to be like one of the greatest blunders in sports history, that all these fighters, the majority of them, there were a few holdouts, just signed blindly these addendums saying, yeah. Like, I mean, could you imagine if they all said, you know what, I don't want to sign this addendum, you know?
True.
No, I didn't agree to this. So why do I bring this up? Because in 2011, GSP signed a new deal with the UFC. He has 4 fights left on that deal. In that deal, he's allowed to wear his own sponsors. In this new era, he cannot wear his own sponsors. There's clearly an issue there. What if all the fighters like GSP said, no, I don't want to sign this. Like, why did they do this?
I don't know.
I still can't wrap my head around it. And this GSP thing, the guys coming back, Chael, GSP, this stuff is going to, and of course we're going to run out of these guys, but it just keeps coming up now in this year of so much change where I'm like, why did these guys just blindly sign this addendum?
Why wouldn't they?
What do you mean, why wouldn't they?
Because we are only now in a place where the very idea of working on behalf of one's interest opposite the UFC is like slowly germinating. Like only now.
Yeah.
They weren't even in that headspace back then. Like part of it is one, you have to like there has to be a mechanism in place for you to collectively bargain, but that is held in place by the very acceptance of the idea that those things are valuable and real and that you should do that. We had fighters, I mean, I guess 151 was the high water mark of being like, you know, we talked about then, like there's just no chance we'll ever work together. Those were like intellectually powerfully driven ideas that shaped how these guys thought. And it was only after all of their money started getting taken away, or not all of it, but key portions of it, they were like, geez. But it was, of course, after the fact. And then, of course, the encroachment by USADA. And I feel like that's what it's been. There's been two factors. One, the slow encroachment on them, taking away their money. Where are you at all times? They're like, geez, really? At the same time that all the money's starting to come in, these massive paydays for these top stars, it sold for $4.2 billion, and they're starting to be like, huh. But that's what it took for them to do that. And for the UFC, why wouldn't you make them do that, right? They've never pushed back hardly on anything at all.
Sure.
They signed away their likeness rights in perpetuity. Why wouldn't they sign up for the Reebok deal?
I'll agree with you, Luke, with regard to the lower half, maybe the lower 3/4 of the roster, because a lot of those guys don't have the sway with the UFC to say, no, I'm not going to sign this, because then they just could, throw in the closet and they're not going to get booked for the fights, or they're going to get opponents that are, they're going to get opponents that are not good for them, or whatever. A lot of things can happen. But there are people on the roster who are at the upper echelon level, but are not Conor McGregor making mega bucks, and those are the guys that I wonder about. These guys who either the champions or the folks who are top contenders, they really needed to have, even without collective bargaining, they needed to have some better representation to understand that this was a bad deal for them. And I know it's fashionable for us to go after Reebok and even go after the UFC for these deals, and I've done my share of that myself. But just to some extent, the fighters need to own that themselves.
I agree.
And they need to recognize that if I'm making a deal for you and I do everything on my terms and you sign it, that's kind of on you.
It's like more of a collective dawning, too, of these guys for so long operated as if there was a privilege. The privilege was to be in the UFC. The privilege would overtake everything else, right? Like it's just, of course you're going to sign it because I don't want to not be in the UFC. I feel like that's something that's eroded over time too, especially since this Reebok deal has been in place, and so many people have been vocal about it, and some people recognize how much of a hit that is. You know what I mean? And then with USADA and everything else that's kind of happened, I just feel like that's an idea that is no longer as solid as it was even a year ago or 2 years ago. Like it's a privilege to be here. It's just, I don't, I can't even understand, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is like the NBA. We're always presenting it like I'm in the biggest, best sports league in the time. You know what I mean? And as long as that was the collective mentality and that's how it was presented, and that was, of course, everybody's just going to sign that stuff.
And some of these guys have, like, think about how many anti-pay arguments we used to have to listen to. Oh, Dana White would say, you don't want to let these rich people know. You don't want these people to let them know what the paydays are, because then everyone comes running. Like, this is the most ludicrous argument I've ever heard. Like, what are you talking about? That's not true at all. Or they would even get scabs. I mean, there was no picket line, but you get guys in the UFC or retired ones being like, we never worried about fighter pay in my day. We just did it for the love of the sport. Another just ludicrous argument. Right. And the other guys would sort of there was this this general acceptance of it. And I think finally it took this real encroachment on them. You know, when the check finally gets there, and it's like, okay, I don't have a Christmas, or you know, what was his name? The Canadian guy who had his water turned off when he was competing on one of the shows. I forget his name. The brown belt kid.
Was it Gagnon?
No, it wasn't. It could have been him too. I don't know.
Roland Delorme.
Roland Delorme.
Yeah.
Had his water turned off.
Yeah.
You know, at some point they're like, what? You know, but it just took that much for them to cry foul.
Not to mention, I mean, like you mentioned, where the sport started and how it went through its different phases, it was always like, well, we have a platform finally. We have this platform that existed forever. We still have a platform. I can go fight in a spotlight and get famous and make some money. And then it became professional. That's where the difference is, the professionalism that came in, and that's another place where GSP really did change perception of the sport. Here's a guy who didn't look like a fighter. You know what I mean? He was one of the original guys who was just
wore suits at the press conference. Remember how big of a deal that was?
He was the original professional. I mean, not the original one, but he was one of the big professionals to really break through in the sport. Now you got a lot of guys who present themselves that way, and the professionalism has lifted up to here. And what comes with professionalism? It's like, then you want to be treated like a professional.
Yeah. What a fascinating time.
Don't forget that NBA money too.
Yes. Last thing on GSP. If he is a free man, how big of a deal is he for a Bellator? Like, do they just write him a blank check? Does he completely change the face of that organization, their fortunes? Can they go into any arena? Definitely in Canada, but in North America, sell it out with him. Is this a big deal? Again,
maybe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, they can go. Are you kidding me? This whole segment began. We're talking about Mount Rushmore of MMA.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can get one of those faces, one of those blocks of granite on into your cage, yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you, as we transition to our next topic, but this is sort of a bridge between the two. I think one story that hasn't really been talked about is, okay, so the UFC was sold for approximately $4 billion in July. The deal was completed in August. So they're now being run by this new organization, this new group of owners led by Ari Emanuel, WME IMG. None of them have talked to the media yet about the sale, about the state of the company, about the future of the company, about decisions, about the layoffs this week, about GSP, et cetera, et cetera. Have they handled this the right way from a PR perspective? I mean, I think that this week in particular has been, a sort of troubling PR week for them, just from, you read all this stuff about people being laid off, loyal employees, and nothing is being said. The only thing that was said was it was less than 15%, which me sounds like classic, corporate spin, which, felt void of any, emotion.
Less than 15% of your workforce is an S-load of your workforce.
Well, not only that, it's like saying, excuse me, sir, we have to amputate your leg. I mean, it's less than 15%, but we're still, less than 50%. If it's 1%, it's a big deal. These
Only
are people.
15% of your family died.
Exactly. Are you guys surprised, and do you think that it's high time? Look, I know people are going to say, oh, you just want to do an interview with them. Of course we all want to interview these people, and let's be honest, we're probably not getting those interviews unless Lorenzo comes back, our loyal viewer, Lorenzo Fertitta, with that big beard. How are you, Lorenzo?
We'll all grow beards.
Are you surprised that 3 months in, they have not said a word?
You know what's interesting to me is I was thinking about this. I think most fans right now are in a state of confusion because there's also rumored strategic changes, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But remember one thing that was always really difficult. That's not quite right. How strong was the fan attachment to the UFC brand the last 10 years? Pretty damn strong, right? Like, fans really responded, and even when they felt like the UFC was in the wrong, they forgave them quickly. And when Dana White had that weird video about Loretta Hunt, they forgave him quickly.
Not only did they forgive him, they backed him.
Yeah. They backed him. So here's my point.
They were unabashed supporters.
Now here's what I'm wondering. I don't know what the answer to this is, but sort of to your point, I wonder, with the way WME is handling this, if that loyalty is going to transfer over to them, or if that will merely be a product of their relationship to Dana and the Lorenzo era of the UFC that will expire with Lorenzo's absence. I think it's a big question. So to answer your question, I don't know that it's a major blunder just yet, but the way they're going, they're not realizing that there's something special to be manicured there.
But think about it like a sports team. When someone, when Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers, shortly thereafter, he met with the media. There was this big press conference, lights, all this craziness. He was, he was all pumped up. You have to sort of put out something. I mean, from what I understand, not only have they not talked...
But that was after...
Sure.
Not the team wasn't ruined, but the Clippers brand with the whole racism
That's just an example. Usually when a new owner comes in, shortly thereafter they're talking. Not only to the media, I mean, from what I understand, and anyone out there can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've asked enough people, there has not been a rallying of the troops, an addressing of the troops by the new ownership group to the actual troops. You know what I'm saying?
You mean like the rank and file at Zuffa?
Yes.
Yeah.
How could this be?
I don't know, but to your point, man, like it's funny because this sport kind of grew. It was like there was this glowing orange nucleus that everybody wanted to defend defend to outsiders coming in. It's a difficult sport to break into as a newbie because people are just going, you don't know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? That's how the kind of passion that this fan base, the niche fan base has. It expanded some, right? But you always had Lorenzo Fertitta. You always had Dana White, even though he became more and more polarizing as time went on. But it seemed always, on some level, they're protecting some golden thing in the middle, right? Of why this fight game. This is what translated. These pieces have been removed to the point, and even Dana White right now is not. To me, he's a shell of himself. That's the way it seems to me. Like he's just not the same guy. He's not. He's high. He's still there. I don't know the extent of his passion anymore.
Right.
He's a very rich man, obviously. But it's like you got Lorenzo who's gone, and all these pieces are starting to fall off, and you wonder how quickly that'll get cold. Especially with it, you get these big, you got the $4 billion figure coming in, all those weird things that kind of connected a person to the fight game, all these people who really poured a lot of passion to it, starts to be compromised on some level. That's how it feels to me. It's like this chilling process. Now, that's all sort of esoteric thought, but I'm like, if you'd want those owners to kind of feed that light again a little bit, because I feel like at this point, that's what everybody's a little concerned with is this thing going to exist, including some of the employees that you've talked to? Is this thing even going to exist in 5 years? Where will it be? Is it going to be destroyed with everything that's kind of going on? And I mean, at this point, you don't know anything. You don't know what their plan is. It's not telegraphed other than the few actions we've seen. Nothing is really telegraphed as to what they're doing.
Yeah, and if you were using the analogy of NBA team being changing ownership, it's almost like one of these corporate takeovers. Even though this is not the same as that, it's not some hostile takeover by venture capitalists or something, but it almost has that kind of vibe to it, that it's a sort of a cold corporate culture that is sweeping into a sport that, like I said earlier, had a very kind of familial environment, and so that's a very dramatic change. And I suspect that these guys, they've made their money by making a lot of moves, and I suspect that they make those moves based upon a deeply thought out strategy, and they probably have a strategy that they want to play out, and they don't want to be talking to the media to have that dissected along the way. I mean, obviously they know the media is going to dissect it, but they don't want to participate in that. So it doesn't surprise me that they're not doing it. If they were doing it, it would probably just be a very very heavily scripted PR move anyway. So it doesn't. So I guess either way, it doesn't really quite surprise me.
The vintage feel like Lorenzo Fertitta. He's a shrewd businessman. We know about his casinos and everything he's done. Dana White. Whatever they are, but you never could fault their passion towards the sport, right? I mean, that's the one thing that always existed.
They're the ones who saved it.
That's what I'm trying to say. And so there was something to rally, even if you couldn't stand those guys after a while, you still rallied around that center. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what drew you in. It was like there was nothing fake about that. There's something fake about this because they're not. First of all, it's a Hollywood. You get a Hollywood connection. All of a sudden, we've got owners that are like, hey, here, look at these celebrity owners that are coming in. It all feels really phony at this point.
Right.
You want to see them come out and be like, with some sincerity, to protect what's going on at the center of that.
I completely share that sentiment. One of the things that's interesting to me is, again, just to reiterate that, look, this is a gross oversimplification, but it feels like Dana and Lorenzo and that team that they built around them, they were the ones who saved it, and WME is the ones who want to cash in on it. And it feels very different. It feels very transactional in the latter half. There's no real guys, I don't need to get up and make this my carpe diem call to action. But okay, different than that is one of the big things I've learned, I think, over the 10 years, and I fundamentally believe this, is in MMA. It's one reason why I do a lot less writing now. I like to do podcasting or video. The MMA fan base, for reasons I don't quite fully understand, they like to look at you. They like to see you. They like to know who you are. They like to have invested in a person. Now, they don't need to know everything about you, and they don't need to know everyone. But they generally, there's a personal attachment that they want to have that I don't, Redskins fans, they want Dan Snyder to die. If they never see him, it's fine. They don't care. MMA fans aren't really built the same way. And these guys at WME, we'll see what happens, but right now they're not. They're just operating like they're the Wizard of Oz. And I don't know who's behind the curtain, and I'd really want to know for our sake as media, but I think the fans want to know, who are we working with?
When Reebok came in, Reebok has been long-standing, is a pretty respected brand, in the apparel world. But they come in and they see this fan base, and they had to have thought like, whoa, we had no idea what we were getting into.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because that's a corporate something that moves in, and then you get all this. It's hard to jibe with the fight game at its center. The way we structure it doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of times too, because it's a different sport. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's a sport that borders on something else. I mean, it's
And it's dramatic when you think about it, because what are we coming out of? We're coming out of a time when Dana White not just would have a press conference. After his press conference, he would have another press
1
conference.
hour.
He would hang out with the media. It was like, in what other environment, not just sports, but anywhere, do you see somebody have a press conference and then another media availability, for a long period of
They
time?
almost created this monster because between the years of 2008 and let's say 2014, they were not only the most accessible sports organization out there. You can make the argument that they were too accessible, like they were telling us too much.
And there were problems with that cult of personality
Absolutely.
they created.
Pre-fight scrum, post-fight scrum, all the other stuff. It was great for us. It was great, as a media member, but they were so open. And now you shut it off, and now there's a new era, and you're making controversial moves, so to speak. I think you're leaving the fans
Shannon
and
Sharp up there saying that Nate Diaz will never make 155.
That's
again.
right.
National media.
Slander Shannon Sharp.
But it's also it's not just the media, it's the fans. Like, the UFC shows up in Philadelphia and Dana White goes on local sports radio and he's chatting it up, and then in the middle of the interview he manages to slip in, hey, anybody, the first 5 people that show up with a Liberty Bell are going to get free tickets to the show. So, they generated a very fan-friendly vibe that made people feel like they were part of the show. And anytime you ever saw, Dana or Lorenzo, when there were public around, they were always very engaged.
no one's better with the fans than Dana White as far as an executive is concerned. Like, I've seen him.
Yeah.
He just has this warmth to him. Like, whether it's real or not, the way he hugs the fans, the way he talks to them, he's very good at that. And I know some people call him a promoter, but he doesn't do that much promoting anymore. He doesn't do press conferences. He doesn't. So who is going to be that guy if it's not him? Now, I was reminded of this scene. I don't know if you guys have seen the film Up in the Air with George Clooney, where they hire these groups to come in and lay off people. The scene that has been described to me that played out in departments all over the world, not just the one in Las Vegas, was a group of WME people, whether they were hired or brought in internally, came in and said, thank you for your time. And it was like 60 to 80 employees. 350 or so total before the layoffs. I think it ends up being a little more than 15 or less than 15%, but you get my point. From what I understand, as far as the Las Vegas portion of the layoffs were concerned, Dana White wasn't there. And I think that people were disappointed in that. This is someone that these people, like, when I think back to the beginning of this whole thing, this story, the Monday after UFC 200, and when you think of UFC 200 Fight Week, and you think of the 3 shows in the span of 3 days, the debacle with John Jones, having to repurpose all their marketing and their production and the hours that those loyal employees put into that company, and then on the Monday morning after 200, 8 a.m., there's an announcement that they've cashed out and they've sold this thing for $4 billion. And all those people, men and women, fathers and mothers, are sitting there thinking like, okay, do I have a job? I didn't make any money out of this deal. Like, what does this all mean for me? You know what I mean? And you think of that, and you think of the layoffs, and you think of the fact that more are coming probably in December before the end of the year. I just can't see how anyone could say to me that this has been handled well from a PR perspective, from an employment perspective. And now you have people, like, I was told that they saw this coming a long time ago. The employees. Yeah. Multiple people equated the scene at Zuffa HQ to that of a morgue, to people just walking around waiting for the guillotine to chop their head off. And then you're sitting there on a Tuesday and you're just waiting to be summoned. And then they go into the Toronto office and pretty much, and not only that, they're getting rid of the high-ranking executives. They're getting rid of the Marshall Zalaznick. Marshall Zalaznick has been there since 2006, since before there was a UK office, since before Michael Bisping was there. Think about that. Gary Cook hasn't been around that long.
Jamie Pollock, no one talks about him.
The tough Latin American. Not only that, he opened the door in Brazil. He was the Brazil
12
guy.
12 years he's at that company.
So and then Tom Wright. Tom Wright got them into Ontario. Without Tom Wright, they don't get into Ontario. He rewrote the criminal
All
code
those
in
guys
Canada.
were like familiar in the sense that they're fighting that same good fight, right?
Yes.
They're all building something.
This is the point. The company that
This
Dana
is
and Lorenzo-
unprecedented for sport. That was my point. Like, it's amazing to see this kind of, and I'm not trying to say, let me just finish the point.
Sure.
I'm not trying to say that these people were the greatest executives in the history of executives. And I'm not trying to say that at WME IMG, they don't have a social media team that could come in and do a better job. Let's be honest, we've sat here on this show and criticized their posters. We've criticized their marketing. We've criticized their promotion. So I'm not saying that they don't have a well-equipped staff that's going to make the UFC better. I just feel like if you're going to wipe, the company clean of all these people who have been there for so long on the front lines, the least you could do is give us an explanation why, to your fan base, to your media, and to the employees that are still there.
Two guys I know who I didn't live with them, but I worked with them in two different capacities in DC. Both left DC to go to Las Vegas to work for the UFC in different roles. And what you get the sense was like why they did it was, and I think a lot of people were this way, which is why they're so let down. It wasn't that just they wanted to work for a corporation as stable and doing exciting things as the UFC. It was a cause. It felt like there was a cause. It reminded me of someone who like gets behind a candidate running for office, and then at the end of the day, you find out your candidate is like, is like Anthony Weiner. You're like, oh my God, how did this happen? I thought you were going to do great things for mayorship in New York. And so like, did they look? You've been laid off, right?
Yeah.
You've been laid off. You've been laid off.
Same situation,
Yeah, I've
too.
been laid off,
Company
too.
that was bought.
Yeah, I've been
See
laid
ya.
off. It's a horrible. There's no right way to lay someone off. It's very, very difficult to do. Okay, it's a hard job.
But when you're a public company,
The problem was when you say, they
public,
shouldn't
but
worry
yeah.
about things like that. When don't worry about this. Your jobs are. I don't think he said your jobs are fine, but
Yeah,
he said
going back to
he
that.
said don't worry about it. That's a really irresponsible thing to do. You cannot make promises or suggestive things like that, and then it goes out and changes it. But I don't know. Part of me feels like this is just what corporate America does. They just whore you as soon as they get a chance to. do it.
UFC wasn't even for sale, according to
Have you ever been in that? Have you ever been in a place where, with a big corporation and either you are being laid off, or I was at a magazine where the entire operation ceased to exist one morning. I was literally editing an article, was called to a meeting, and the entire magazine shut down. So an article was on my computer screen that with me halfway through it, trying to edit it, and that was the end of it. And this is what happens. It's an impersonal experience, and you can be with coworkers who you love. It doesn't surprise me in a way that Dana White wasn't at headquarters, because he has developed personal relationships with those people, and it probably, not to say that he shouldn't have had to face them, but it probably was a very difficult thing. My former boss at the Boston Globe, the sports editor there, I had left before this, but when they started doing all the layoffs, from what I heard, he was really scarce, because it was really difficult for him, yet he also represents the company. So when you're the guy who's representing the company, and yet you have a personal relationship for those people who are being lapped off, it puts you in a very difficult spot.
What's he supposed to do? Like walk them to their cars?
No, I know, but look, I don't begrudge the new ownership group for doing these layoffs. Anyone who thought that there wasn't going to be change, that they weren't going to bring in their own people, especially considering what WME IMG is and what they do so well, you were being foolish. They were obviously going to bring in their own people. I just wonder if all of this goes back to the fact that perhaps these people who deal with multi-million-dollar movie stars and sports stars and all this stuff, if they don't really have all that much respect for the MMA media corps, if they don't really think that they actually have to answer to anyone, you know what I mean? Because I can't imagine.
They don't.
Well, not that they don't, but I just can't imagine someone buying X sports team and just not saying a thing,
Yes, that is
making
weird.
these kinds of changes and not addressing anyone. Not even one interview, not even a fluff interview, not even going to FS1 where Colin Cowherd's gonna serve him right down the middle. Not even that.
that's
not even that.
That's not the part of it that concerns me. I look at
It's not a concern, it's just kind of
I look at the people
observation.
who have been let go, and I wonder whether there was a careful analysis of, well, this guy does this, so we can fill that in with these people, whether that was the tack they took, or if they just looked at salaries and said, well, this guy makes a lot of money, and so we'll just get rid of that. I feel like there are times when the corporate culture, certainly in media, and I imagine that the corporate culture that now exists at the UFC, it's really bottom line. We spent $4 billion in this thing, so we need to start recouping money.
Sure.
And does it become something about, we're going to do all the things necessary in order to make the most profit and spend the least amount of money possible? And if that's what the UFC becomes, then I think that we're going to be in some trouble. But if it becomes a thing where we say, as you point out, we can do this better. We're better at promoting this. We're better at building stars. We're better at this. And if that's what their mission is, that they're going to make it a better thing, we've let go of these people, but we're going to fill those roles with people who are going to do these things better. It's going to be a difficult thing for those folks.
But it's
who
all
are let go.
speculation on our part because we have no idea
We have
what
no
the
idea.
mission is
But
right
all
now.
we do know is that we do know, as we pointed out earlier, the guys who were running the show before were huge fight fans. The guys who are running the shows now, I have no idea.
Sure, I'm not ready though to subscribe to this nostalgia that like it was so much better back in the day. I mean, look at what we're learning now about the
Change is always
contract.
scary.
Yeah.
Change is always scary.
Sure, but like I know people would die on a hill for Lorenzo Fertitta. Like they have told me that he was a fantastic boss. But let's not pretend like there weren't issues back in the day with the UFC when they were running the show. I just don't know what to make of the new era because no one has told us. And also, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. The one thing that I can sort of figure out is, I mean, you look at Brazil has lost its leader, Giovanni Decker. He quit, but maybe he saw the writing on the wall. Jamie Pollock, Latin America, gone. Tom Wright, gone in Canada. I mean, it seems like the sort of regional departments, the international, Ken Berger in Asia, gone. So that seems to be clear, like they're going to try to keep it all in-house, and maybe that goes to the idea of doing less shows next year, which we've been sort of advocating for quite some time. What a fascinating time in the sport. I mean, how many times have we said that this year? But
Even
this week
Joe
in
Silva,
particular.
I mentioned him, but he's another guy who was right there that was pumping blood through that system. And I feel like people really understood they understood Joe Silva's role, and they understood that he was a big fan within the sport first. He was a fan first, and I feel like that's the one thing that they're going to have to prove is that they're fans of the sport and they understand that need to share in that.
Okay, one last thing before we go. We spent a lot of time on those subjects which kind of tie into each other. Bellator announced that Chael Sonnen's first opponent is going to be Tito Ortiz, January 21st, Forum in Inglewood, California. How do you guys feel about this matchup? Like, is this the right matchup for Chael in his Bellator debut? You guys like it?
This is awesome. How
This
do you
is
not,
awesome?
How do you not like this fight? Okay.
What is so good about it?
Well, first of all, it's right in the wheelhouse of what Bellator does these days. I mean, this is, and frankly, a better version of it. But okay, look, people like to bag on Tito, and I'm not prepared to do that. But I think Chael Sonnen is, and Chael Sonnen, if they do this fight correctly, is going to eat him alive verbally in the lead up to that. And everyone who's like, I don't like Bellator, maybe you don't, but you like Chael, and I know you like Chael's shtick, and you're going to get someone doing it against someone who has no capacity to get back. If the fight sucks, it's only going to be 3 rounds. It's not some 5-round dreadful affair. And you just know it's going to be an absolute Hall of Fame showcase of donkery. One way or the other.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to see this train.
Wow.
Yes.
I haven't seen you this excited for a fight in a while.
Just because we're talking about Anderson Silva versus CM Punk verbally. That's what this is,
that's
right?
I don't know, Luke. Do you really think that Chael's going to be able to match
Yeah.
Tito's verbal skills here? I mean,
I saw Tito put out a tweet like, you just signed your death wish. And to me, Tito Ortiz
Again, it
is
doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, well, it's like he represents
How do you sign a death wish?
2006, 2007. Can I just say something like, I'm just kind of over Tito Ortiz at this point.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't share in your enthusiasm. Like, I wish Vanderlei was the first opponent, but that can't happen just yet. It has to happen in May or beyond May. I'm just kind of over the shtick. Like walking out with an Osama bin Laden shirt and it's just so passe.
I don't believe you.
No.
Here's what I mean.
I couldn't be more serious.
I believe what you're telling me. You believe.
Yes.
I think when it comes time,
I'm so over the
You're
shtick.
gonna see. You're gonna
I mean,
see.
even that phrase, "you just signed your death wish," it just feels so like
But who
1998
would
to
you
me.
rather put him up? Like that's the thing with Chelsea. Even if it came back to UFC, you're like, well, who would he be fighting?
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to be fighting guys that would just be like an obvious. Hey, put those guys together. That'd be a fun fight, or that'll make for some interesting lead up. I mean, in that sense, I'm like, what better? You know what I mean?
Tito's a good foil. Tito is a foil, no matter who you put Tito against. But to Luke's point, a guy who can verbally spar with Tito and just obliterate him is going to be kind of more. It's going to be entertaining, whether you like the fight itself, whether once the announcer, or the referee waves these two guys together, everything beyond that, you may not care much about. But whatever happens before then is going to be gold.
Chael is the story here. I want to see how he looks. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Who knows how he's going to look physically? Who knows how he's going to fight? Who knows about the style matchup? I'm just kind of tired of the shtick. And look, I love shtick.
both sides.
No, Tito. I think Chael is a nice welcome addition to what we've been seeing. And
Got it, man.
I don't know, man.
Schlenko?
Dude, it's
What is it? Bonner he beat, right? Easily,
Yeah.
split decision.
Yeah. and then he lost.
Yeah.
He lost to Liam McGeary.
McGeary with a bad knee.
That's right.
Dude, it's going to be a battle rapper versus the MMA version of Pootie Tang. This is going to be.
You think Chael's just going to go in there for the jugular?
I don't think he's going to be necessarily mean, but I think he's definitely going to have a few. Remember Adam Sandler? What movie was it where he played dodgeball with the kids and he was like pegging them right in the face?
Billy Madison.
Yeah, it's going to be like that scene. It's going to be great.
I don't know. I just I'm,
You guys are really down on this?
I'm
I saw
down.
that. I saw that. I was like, oh,
I mean,
Scott
I'm
Coker,
not
you
down on it
genius.
at
Jeff, you agree with me, right? No, you're not.
No,
All right.
I don't
For
know.
once, I'm the one who's not buying, the Wolf tickets. I usually eat that stuff up. I just kind of feel like his whole shtick is passé.
But,
I'm
but
done
he
with
doesn't
it.
have to do much. He's like
He
the.
pointed out. That's what's great about it.
Okay,
right?
great, fine. I mean, I'm not trying to root for Chael Sonnen here. It sounds like that's what we're advocating, but it's just like,
Here's a question about Tito.
Yeah.
If this isn't his retirement fight, and I have a hard time seeing how it would be, what is his retirement fight?
Yeah.
Like, what's he going to do to like exit out? Because
well, this is the last fight on his contract.
This one, oof. Okay, all right.
I mean, it has been a while. It's been like, what, a year since he last fought? And I think they were kind of waiting for the right kind of opponent
Was
for
the
him.
first Dynamite show?
Yeah, the Liam McGeary fight. But I don't know, maybe as time, I'm surprised that they're not doing it at the Pond, because I feel like, if they're going to go there in California, he was always a draw at the Pond because he's the OC guy. I mean, it's pretty close, but that was a little surprising to me. But I don't know. I was like, is there no one else?
Do they announce it on SportsCenter? Come on, man.
Yeah, it's big.
It's big doings.
Yeah. Big news, big news. All right, well, that does it for us. What a week, huh? A little bit of a depressing one at times.
Yeah.
I
Strange
know.
times.
Look, it is a state of transition in mixed martial arts, and I think that part of our duty on this particular show when we're talking about the MMA beat is to sort of talk about these things and not try to be too negative, not try to be too positive, but just sort of speak about them. And I don't know if this was a particularly great week for the UFC, and maybe it's highlighted a little more because of the fact that there are no events to speak of, and
Totally.
we're kind of, that's what makes it so interesting, the timing of it all. But I think we all want to see George St. Pierre fight again if he wants to fight again. We want to see people not lose their jobs. I think we just want some answers on what's going on. And right now, it would be, in my opinion, very well received if someone did speak about it, whether it was promoter speak or not. But that's the state that we live in 2016.
Even Scott Coker, when they took over, I mean, at first his conference call was like, well, I'll get back to you.
Sure.
I'll get back to you. But eventually he kind of sort of got back to people.
What I'm trying to say is I'd love to hear from Bjorn Rebney. I mean, it has been some time.
Mexico!
All right, well, that does it for us. It's another relatively quiet weekend in the world of MMA this weekend, although Bellator is back on Friday. They're in
Kimbo Slice
Memphis.
Jr.
Kimbo Slice Jr., Alexander Shlemenko making his long-awaited return against Kendall Grove, and don't forget about Ryan Couture.
Oh, God, I did forget about Ryan Couture.
Yeah,
Damn it.
I'm happy I reminded you.
There you go.
But for now, we will say goodbye. Again, thank you so much for watching the program. For Luke, Chuck, Jeff, I am Ariel. Again, thanks again, and enjoy the fights this weekend.